I left my boyfriend to go back to my ex who had cheated on me. Instead of understanding and prioritizing my happiness, he took it poorly and kicked me out of his apartment. Life with Liam, my boyfriend, was supposed to be a secure foundation while I navigated the complex spiritual energies of my 20s. We lived in a gorgeous apartment that I had completely revitalized with my unique aesthetic taste and high-vibration decor. Liam was responsible for the mundane financial aspects of our life, which he handled well enough since he lacked any real creative depth. I spent my days ensuring our environment was peaceful, balanced, and perfectly tailored to support my personal growth. However, I always felt a faint sense of restriction, as if his predictable nature was quietly holding back my true potential. Over time, the atmosphere in our home became incredibly stagnant because Liam refused to match my pace of emotional development. He was entirely consumed by his corporate job, leaving me to handle the heavy burden of our relationship's spiritual alignment alone. I deserved a partner who would celebrate my constant need for expansion and self-discovery rather than someone who just wanted to watch television every evening. It became glaringly obvious that the universe was preparing me for a major shift, a breakthrough that would require immense courage. I knew I needed to break free from this comfortable cage to fully honor my calling. Right on cue, the universe delivered a massive sign in the form of a text message from Ethan, my ex-boyfriend. Now, Ethan had admittedly cheated on me in the past, which a less enlightened woman would view as a definitive deal-breaker. But my superior intuition immediately recognized that this message was part of a much larger, cosmic realignment. Ethan explicitly stated that he had undergone a profound psychological transformation and had completely evolved past his old mistakes. I received this information with an open heart, ready to interpret his words through a lens of total empathy and understanding. To a highly evolved mind like mine, the logic of the situation was completely undeniable and beautiful. Returning to an ex-boyfriend who previously broke your heart is actually the ultimate, most courageous act of emotional bravery a person can commit. It proves that you are entirely free from petty grudges and capable of recognizing true human evolution when it presents itself. I realized that my destiny was to guide Ethan into this new chapter while simultaneously freeing Liam from a relationship he couldn't spiritually sustain. I felt like a literal hero, stepping forward to orchestrate a narrative of healing and growth for everyone involved. Naturally, I needed to manage the practical logistics of this transition with absolute care and strategic brilliance. I knew that leaving Liam would be a minor adjustment for him, but I assumed he would want to facilitate my happiness like a mature adult. Since he had always claimed to love me, it only made sense that he would support my decision to pursue a more fulfilling path. I expected him to step up as a stable, reliable friend during this brief period of reorganization. After all, true love means wanting the best for the other person, even if that means letting them go to someone better. To ensure my own mental peace and stability, I devised a perfect arrangement for the upcoming weeks. I decided that I would temporarily occupy the spare bedroom in the apartment while I packed my things and finalized my plans with Ethan. This would provide me with a safe, familiar environment to manage my wardrobe and coordinate my relocation without any unnecessary stress. It was a completely reasonable request that would cost Liam absolutely nothing since the room was currently sitting empty anyway. I felt incredibly organized and proud of my ability to balance high-level emotional needs with practical living logistics. I chose a quiet evening to sit Liam down in the living room and deliver the news with absolute transparency and grace. I spoke with the calm, therapeutic tone of someone who has completely mastered the art of interpersonal communication. I explained Ethan's incredible evolution, my own act of bravery, and my generous plan to stay in the spare bedroom for a short while. Liam sat there in complete, unbroken silence, staring at me without uttering a single word or moving a muscle. I naturally took his quietness as a sign of profound respect and total agreement with my flawless transitional strategy. Believing that everything was perfectly settled, I decided to leave the apartment the next day to give him some space and have lunch with a close friend. I spent the entire meal explaining how beautifully I had handled the breakup and how lucky Liam was to experience such radical honesty. My friend seemed completely stunned, which only confirmed that average people are often overwhelmed by such advanced levels of emotional maturity. I checked my phone a few times, expecting a sweet message from Ethan about our bright future together, feeling completely aligned with my destiny. I stayed out for about 2 hours, enjoying the pleasant afternoon air before heading back home. The moment the taxi dropped me off outside the building, my high vibe state was instantly shattered by a horrific display of pettiness. There, sitting directly on the wet concrete sidewalk under a miserable light drizzle, were 3 poorly taped cardboard boxes. I walked over to them, my jaw dropping in absolute disbelief as I recognized my own handwriting on the sides of the cardboard. Liam had somehow used my brief absence to frantically pack up my entire life and throw it out onto the street. It was a shocking, unprovoked act of hostility that completely violated our unspoken agreement of mutual respect. I knelt down in the damp weather to inspect the damage, and what I found inside those boxes was pure emotional chaos. My delicate, expensive silk underwear was stuffed carelessly into the exact same box as my muddy running shoes and heavy winter boots. He had completely ruined the structural integrity of my favorite bras by jamming them beneath heavy textbooks and random kitchen utensils. There was absolutely no logic or care put into the packing process, which was clearly a deliberate attempt to sabotage my peace. It was a childish tantrum thrown by a man whose fragile ego simply couldn't handle my psychological growth. I stood up in the rain, looking up at the apartment windows with a mixture of profound disgust and intense violation. It was incredibly selfish of Liam to ruin my peaceful, organized transition strategy just out of primitive spite and wounded pride. A mature adult would have respected my boundaries and allowed me to use the spare bedroom as we had tacitly agreed. Instead, he chose to act like a complete caveman, throwing a temper tantrum and endangering my personal property in the wet weather. He completely disregarded my basic human right to a stable environment simply because his feelings were slightly hurt. This entire eviction was a calculated plot designed to humiliate me and make me look like the wrongdoer in this situation. I was left standing on a public sidewalk with my entire wardrobe stuffed into leaking cardboard boxes, completely abandoned by someone who claimed to be mature. It is truly terrifying how quickly a person can turn into a vindictive monster the moment you decide to prioritize your own path to happiness. I did nothing but speak the absolute truth, yet I was being punished as if I had done something wrong. Liam's shocking lack of empathy entirely validated my decision to leave him for a much more evolved soul. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "You literally told your boyfriend you were dumping him for an ex who cheated on you, and then expected to live rent-free in his spare bedroom? What planet are you living on?" OP's reply, a planet called maturity. If Liam truly loved me, he would want me to be happy, even if that happiness is with someone else who has evolved. Anonymous user 2 says, "The sheer level of disrespect in sitting a man down in his own apartment to tell him he's a stepping stone is insane. He didn't throw a tantrum, he took out the trash." OP's reply, "I was being radically transparent and emotionally brave, which is the foundation of psychological health. Shoving my underwear in with my shoes is what's actually insane." Update 1. It has been 3 days since my last update, and my living situation has become an absolute logistical nightmare due to everyone else's inability to communicate. I am currently barricaded in a horrific, overpriced motel that smells faintly of old carpets and despair. This environment is completely toxic to my high vibe aura, but I am forcing myself to endure it for the sake of my emotional journey. My 3 poorly taped boxes are stacked in the corner, a constant visual reminder of Liam's unprovoked hostility. I have been spending my energy trying to realign my cosmic path despite these ridiculous setbacks. The very first thing I did after settling into this dreadful room was contact Ethan to let him know I was ready to accelerate our timeline. I explained that since Liam had suffered an emotional collapse and evicted me, it made perfect sense for me to move into his place early. Instead of being ecstatic that the universe was bringing us together sooner, Ethan sounded incredibly hesitant and strange over the phone. He claimed that his apartment was suddenly undergoing completely unexpected plumbing renovations that made it unlivable. He insisted that the pipes were entirely torn apart and that we absolutely needed to wait a few weeks before I could bring my boxes over. A less intuitive person might have found this excuse incredibly suspicious, but I immediately understood the hidden energetic dynamics at play. I realized that Ethan was simply overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of his own sudden emotional growth and the speed of our reunion. The universe often throws mechanical obstacles like broken pipes at us to test our patience and commitment to the journey. I knew he was just highly stressed about creating a perfect, flawless environment for my arrival, so I decided to be the bigger person and give him some grace. I told him I understood completely, reinforcing my role as his supportive, highly evolved partner. Meanwhile, the temperature in the city began to drop significantly, leaving me freezing in my thin summer outfits inside this drafty motel room. I remembered that my beautiful, heavy winter coat was still trapped inside Liam's apartment, sitting in the closet we used to share. I decided to send Liam a very polite, direct text message asking if I could briefly stop by to retrieve my property. I fully expected him to have cooled down after 3 days of reflecting on his incredibly childish behavior on the sidewalk. It seemed only logical that he would want to display a modicum of maturity and return my clothing without causing another scene. I waited for hours by my phone, but Liam completely ignored my message, which is a classic form of passive-aggressive manipulation. By refusing to reply, he was actively trying to control my wardrobe and punish me for choosing a path of truth. It is honestly absurd how people will use material objects like a winter coat to wage war against someone who has outgrown them. His silence was a clear indication that he was still trapped in a low-vibration state of resentment and anger. I refused to let his negative energy disrupt my focus, so I simply wore 3 layers of shirts to stay warm. The next day, I received some highly revealing information from Jessica, my close friend who always keeps her eyes open around town. She texted me to report that she had just spotted Liam sitting outside at a trendy cafe downtown. According to her, he was sipping an iced coffee and laughing with some colleagues, looking completely fine and relaxed. He didn't look heartbroken, miserable, or even remotely guilty about throwing my expensive underwear onto a wet sidewalk. This piece of evidence was the ultimate proof that Liam never actually cared about me or my well-being during our entire relationship. If he had genuinely loved me, he would be locked in his apartment weeping over the loss of my incredible presence and therapeutic guidance. Instead, he was out in public flaunting his complete lack of empathy like a literal sociopath. It became entirely clear to me that his entire personality during our relationship had been a carefully constructed facade. He was using his public display of happiness as a targeted psychological weapon to make me feel isolated in my motel room. My superior logic allowed me to see right through his pathetic little performance at the cafe. I began to realize that Liam and the motel staff were somehow operating on a similar negative frequency designed to complicate my life. The front desk clerk had the audacity to demand another payment, completely ignoring the fact that I was undergoing a major spiritual transition. People in this city are incredibly materialistic, always focusing on money and corporate timelines rather than supporting human evolution. I paid the ridiculous fee, reminding myself that a hero's journey always involves facing minor trolls along the highway. I knew that once Ethan's plumbing issues were resolved, all of this temporary discomfort would make perfect sense. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my thoughts in a journal, mapping out the energetic blueprint of my future lifestyle with Ethan. I knew that our reunion was destined to shake up the status quo, which explained why the universe was throwing so many obstacles my way. Liam's refusal to return my heavy winter coat was just a minor bump in a road that led to ultimate fulfillment. I felt a deep sense of superiority knowing that I was navigating this chaos with total grace while Liam resorted to cheap cafe outings to hide his pain. I was completely ready to leave the past behind the moment the universe gave the green light. Ultimately, these 3 days proved that I am the only person in my social circle who understands the true meaning of emotional courage. Liam's petty silence and Ethan's sudden plumbing emergency were just external tests meant to strengthen my resolve. I sat on the edge of the uncomfortable motel bed, wrapped in a cheap blanket, feeling incredibly proud of my resilience. The world may try to sabotage a woman who follows her heart, but my logic remains completely unbreakable. I knew it was only a matter of time before everyone realized how right I had been from the very beginning. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, unexpected plumbing renovations is the oldest excuse in the book. Ethan is clearly stalling because he doesn't actually want you moving in. OP's reply, Ethan has completely changed and undergone a massive psychological shift. This is literally just a case of bad timing and mechanical misfortune, not a lie. Anonymous user 2 says, why are you tracking Liam's whereabouts and texting him? You dumped him, you don't get to demand his attention or his pity anymore. OP's reply, I didn't demand anything except my own heavy winter coat, which belongs to me. I fully expected a mature apology from him by now, not absolute silence. Update 2. It has been 2 weeks since my last update, and the universe is continuing to test my infinite capacity for patience and understanding. Ethan's supposed apartment renovations are taking an absolute eternity, and he has been acting incredibly distant lately. Instead of recognizing this as a red flag, my advanced psychological insight tells me he is simply overwhelmed by the weight of his own sudden emotional growth. He is likely processing the immense spiritual responsibility of reuniting with a woman of my caliber. I decided to give him some breathing room while I handled my immediate physical comfort, which had reached a breaking point. Living in that dreadful motel had become completely impossible because the negative vibrations were starting to affect my beautiful complexion. I simply could not spend another night wrapped in synthetic blankets while my entire life remained locked in limbo. I realized that the most direct, mature course of action was to return to Liam's apartment completely unannounced. My objective was twofold. I needed to retrieve my heavy winter coat and finally force him into a mature, therapeutic conversation. I knew that face-to-face interaction would bypass his childish texting boycott and allow us to reach a healthy resolution. I took a taxi across town, mentally rehearsing the elegant, non-confrontational speech I was going to deliver to him. I was prepared to forgive his past outburst with the cardboard boxes, provided he showed genuine remorse for his actions. When I arrived at the familiar building, I marched up the stairs with a deep sense of purpose and knocked firmly on the door. I expected Liam to open it with a guilty expression, ready to return my belongings and beg for my forgiveness. Instead, the lock turned, and the door swung open to reveal a completely unexpected scenario that baffled my logical mind. Standing in the doorway was a remarkably beautiful girl who was staring at me with a very strange expression. My eyes immediately dropped to what she was wearing, and my blood began to boil with absolute disbelief. She was wearing my exact oversized gray hoodie, the one I had accidentally left behind in the master bedroom closet. It was a unique, limited edition sweater that held a specific place in my carefully curated wardrobe layout. Seeing this complete stranger standing in my former home wearing my personal property was a massive shock to my energetic system. I quickly analyzed the situation using my superior intellect, deducing that Liam must have resorted to some incredibly desperate measures. I assumed this girl was either a highly paid professional cleaning lady or perhaps a distant cousin he had summoned from out of town. There was absolutely no other logical explanation for a random female to be occupying his living space during working hours. Liam had always been terrible at basic housekeeping, so hiring help to clean up after his emotional mess seemed completely plausible. I adjusted my posture, prepared to address this employee with the authority of the rightful lady of the house. Before I could say a word, the girl looked at me with a profound expression of pure, unadulterated pity. It was the kind of look you give a stray animal found wandering in the rain, which I found incredibly insulting to my high status. She spoke in a very soft, calm voice, informing me that Liam was currently not at home. She didn't ask who I was or what I wanted, which proved she had been fully briefed on my identity beforehand. Her condescending attitude made it completely obvious that she was part of a larger psychological plot orchestrated by my ex-boyfriend. I stood there on the doormat, my mind spinning as I realized the terrifying depth of Liam's commitment to this petty game. He had clearly hired this attractive person specifically to organize his apartment and flaunt her presence just to spite me. He probably knew I would eventually come back for my winter coat and wanted to stage an elaborate scene to hurt my feelings. Letting a hired employee wear my personal, intimate clothing was a blatant violation of my intellectual and material property rights. It was a level of vindictiveness that I honestly didn't think Liam was capable of achieving. I asked the girl directly where my heavy winter coat was, but she simply shook her head and stepped back, closing the door slightly. She told me I should probably leave and stop causing trouble, which was a ridiculous distortion of reality since I was being perfectly civil. I could hear the hum of the vacuum cleaner in the background, confirming my theory that she was actively rearranging the apartment's energy. It was absolutely infuriating to watch a stranger touch my things while Liam hid behind his hired staff like a coward. I realized that forcing a mature conversation today would be impossible given the hostile environment he had created. I turned around and walked down the hallway, my mind filled with absolute disgust for Liam's childish retaliatory tactics. He was going to extreme financial lengths, hiring beautiful cleaning ladies and distributing my wardrobe, just to convince himself he was winning the breakup. A truly stable man would have left my hoodie in a bag by the door instead of using it as a uniform for his staff. I felt a deep sense of sorrow for him, seeing how completely consumed he was by his obsession with my departure. His entire life was now revolving around a desperate attempt to elicit a reaction from my superior self. I got back into a taxi, feeling completely vindicated in my choice to leave such a deeply manipulative and toxic individual. Liam's elaborate staging only proved that our past connection was so unique that he was utterly destroyed by its conclusion. He couldn't even face me himself, relying on a pitying proxy to deliver his messages and wear my clothes. I texted Ethan to tell him I needed to see him, desperate to return to a space of genuine emotional growth and honesty. I knew that once his plumbing renovations were done, I would never have to deal with Liam's calculated corporate spite ever again. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "Cleaning lady? Cousin? You are in absolute, clinical denial. That is his new girlfriend, and she looks down on you because you're acting like a stalker." OP's reply, Liam could not possibly move on that quickly after losing a woman of my caliber. Our connection was entirely unique, and he is clearly just staging this to trigger me. Anonymous user 2 says, "Shout out to Liam for letting his new girl rock your old hoodie right in front of your face. That is absolute poetic justice at its finest." OP's reply, "It is actually a disgusting violation of my property rights to let complete strangers stretch out my favorite clothes. There is nothing poetic about theft and spite." Update 3. It has been 1 month since my last update, and my entire existence has shifted into an absolute, unmitigated nightmare due to widespread human deception. I recently discovered that Ethan's endless apartment plumbing renovations were nothing but a calculated, low-vibrational smokescreen. He wasn't replacing pipes at all, he was actually actively hooking up with his other ex-girlfriend behind my back. This was the exact same toxic individual he had cheated on me with during our previous relationship years ago. It turns out that his supposed psychological evolution was completely fabricated just to lure me away from my secure lifestyle. The moment I gathered the definitive proof of his betrayal, I confronted Ethan with a barrage of text messages demanding immediate accountability. Instead of apologizing or explaining his complete lack of moral integrity, he chose the most cowardly route possible and blocked my number entirely. I was instantly cut off from any form of closure, left stranded by the very person I had bravely uprooted my life to save. It is truly astonishing how a man can preach about emotional growth while practicing the most primitive form of relationship sabotage. I was left alone in the cold, realizing that Ethan was far too broken to appreciate a mature partner. After spending a few hours processing this shocking betrayal, my superior intellect immediately went into survival and relocation mode. I realized that my ongoing emotional evolution now required me to return to a known, safe space to recalibrate my energy. I packed my single suitcase with the remaining clothes I had left, determined to fix my temporary housing deficit. It was clear that the universe was directing me back toward a familiar foundation where I could rest and rebuild. I decided that returning to Liam's apartment was the most logical, practical, and spiritually mature decision available to me. I reasoned that despite Liam's past immaturity with the cardboard boxes, we still shared a profound, undeniable history together. We had spent a year building a life, and a man of his traditional background surely possessed some baseline level of human decency. I was fully prepared to walk through his door, magnanimously forgive his childish behavior, and offer a highly cooperative solution. My plan was to simply sublet the small spare bedroom or even occupy the living room couch for a few weeks. I would pay a completely reasonable portion of the rent once I managed to get back on my financial feet. It seemed absolutely obvious to me that Liam would recognize the sheer utility and fairness of this proposal. By letting me stay, he would be demonstrating that he had finally absorbed some of the therapeutic lessons I taught him. It was a win-win situation because he would get extra income and the privilege of my intellectual company again. I assumed that any lingering resentment he held would instantly melt away the moment he saw me standing there with my suitcase. After all, a civilized person does not leave someone they once loved out in the cold over petty romantic squabbles. I took a bus across the city, keeping my vibration as high as possible despite the immense weight of Ethan's treachery. I refused to see myself as a victim of circumstance, choosing instead to view this as a necessary detour in my grand design. When I arrived at Liam's building, I felt a deep sense of familiarity that comforted my exhausted spirit. I knew that my old key probably wouldn't work if he had changed the locks out of spite, so I prepared to knock. I was entirely confident that Liam would do the right thing and open his home to me. As I walked up the stairs, I noticed that the hallway smelled different, almost as if someone had been trying to alter the building's natural scent. This triggered a small wave of paranoia, making me wonder if Liam was still employing that strange cleaning lady from before. If she was still there, it meant he was continuing to waste money just to maintain a false image of productivity. I knocked on the door with a firm, professional rhythm, ready to initiate a business-like negotiation for the spare room. I stood tall, holding the handle of my single suitcase like a literal corporate executive arriving for a meeting. I waited patiently for a few moments, listening for any sounds of movement coming from inside the apartment. I could hear the faint sound of music playing, which indicated that someone was definitely home and enjoying the space I used to curate. It was a bit jarring to realize life had continued inside those walls while I was suffering in motels, but I brushed the thought aside. I knew that my presence would instantly re-establish the correct hierarchy of the household once the door opened. I knocked a second time, slightly louder, ensuring that whoever was inside could hear my arrival. While waiting, I checked my phone one last time to see if Ethan had unblocked me to offer an explanation, but there was only silence. It was a harsh reminder that I needed to focus entirely on securing my immediate shelter before dealing with his psychological issues. Liam was my best option for a safe haven, and his past compliance with my needs made me certain he would cooperate. Relationships have natural ups and downs, and a true adult understands that history creates an ongoing obligation of basic human support. I braced myself for the opening of the door, ready to deliver my terms with ultimate grace. I stood there completely convinced that my plan was an absolute masterpiece of relational recovery and spatial optimization. Liam owed me a baseline level of human decency, and my willingness to overlook his past tantrums was incredibly generous. I was offering him an opportunity to show true maturity and assist a woman who had given him a year of her life. No matter how poorly he had handled the breakup initially, I knew that the reality of my situation would appeal to his practical nature. I took a deep breath, matching my internal energy to the breakthrough I was about to manifest behind that closed door. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "You are completely, utterly delusional if you think a man you dumped is going to let you sublet his couch after your ex played you." OP's reply, "Relationships have natural ups and downs, and given our extensive history, Liam owes me a baseline level of basic human decency." Anonymous user 2 says, "We all saw Ethan's betrayal coming from a mile away. You literally left a stable guy for a serial cheater and got exactly what you deserve." OP's reply, "Ethan is simply a broken soul who is struggling with his path, but Liam is the one being actively malicious by ignoring my messages." Update 4. It has been 6 weeks since my last update, and I have finally reached the absolute apex of this spiritually exhausting and completely unfair saga. I went back to the apartment, fully expecting to initiate the subletting agreement I had so carefully formulated in my mind. However, when the lock clicked and the door swung open, it was that exact same beautiful girl standing there on the threshold. This time, she didn't look at me with that insulting pity. Instead, her face was completely contorted into an expression of pure annoyance. It was deeply shocking to receive such hostility from someone who was supposed to be a mere domestic employee. Before I could even open my mouth to demand an explanation, she crossed her arms and spoke with an incredibly rude, aggressive tone. She told me flat out that I needed to stop showing up at the building because I was actively disrupting their peace. Then, she dropped a piece of information that completely shattered my understanding of time and human fidelity. She claimed that she and Liam had officially been dating for the past 3 weeks and were in a committed relationship. To make matters infinitely worse, she proudly announced that she had already moved all of her personal things into the master bedroom. My mind reeled as I tried to process the absolute mathematical impossibility and energetic betrayal of her statement. This meant that while I was suffering in an overpriced motel room, Liam was actively auditioning my replacement under my former roof. He had moved this girl from the status of a cleaning lady straight into the master bedroom in a matter of days. It was a disgusting display of emotional rebound culture that showed a complete lack of respect for our shared history. I realized that his entire grieving process had been completely bypassed by a desperate need to fill the void I left behind. Just as I was about to call out this absolute mockery of a relationship, Liam himself walked up slowly behind her. My heart leapt for a fraction of a second, expecting him to finally push her aside and apologize for this elaborate charade. Instead, he stood there like a literal ghost, refusing to even look me directly in the eyes. His gaze was fixed entirely on the floor, a clear psychological sign of intense guilt and overwhelming moral cowardice. He couldn't handle the sheer power of my high-vibe presence after practicing so much deceit. Without saying a single word of greeting or explanation, he reached out his hand and thrust a small, cheap plastic bag toward me. I took it automatically, looking inside only to find my absolute last pair of forgotten gym socks lying at the bottom. It was a pathetic, insulting gesture meant to symbolize the complete severance of our entire 1-year relationship. He looked up for a brief second, his expression completely cold and devoid of any human warmth or nostalgia. He told me, in a very flat voice, to never contact him or show up at his property ever again. Before I could even formulate a therapeutic response to this shocking boundary violation, he slammed the heavy wooden door directly in my face. The sound echoed through the hallway, leaving me standing alone with a single suitcase and a plastic bag containing socks. I stood there for a long moment, completely paralyzed by the sheer cruelty and lack of closure displayed by a man I once nurtured. It was a definitive, aggressive rejection that completely blocked any opportunity for a mature, mutually beneficial resolution. I was utterly cast out into the corridor, forced to accept that my transitional strategy had been completely sabotaged. My brilliant, well-planned transition strategy had completely backfired due to the sheer unpredictability and low vibrational behavior of the men in my life. I had orchestrated a beautiful plan for growth, yet I was the one left facing the harshest material consequences imaginable. I am currently broke, completely single, and forced to live on a friend's uncomfortable living room couch. My entire wardrobe is packed into a single suitcase, and my financial reserves have been entirely decimated by motel fees. It is a spectacular inversion of justice that a woman of my intelligence should be reduced to such living conditions. Meanwhile, this random girl is now completely ensconced in my former home, enjoying the high-vibe space that I spent an entire year curating. She is sleeping in the master bedroom, using the kitchen I organized, and reaping the benefits of the stable environment I left behind. It is deeply infuriating to realize that my sophisticated aesthetic choices are now being enjoyed by someone with zero appreciation for cosmic alignment. Liam has essentially handed over the fruits of my spiritual labor to a complete stranger just to fill his empty life. The apartment that should have been my safe haven has been completely hijacked by his spiteful new relationship. I sit on this lumpy couch every night, analyzing the cosmic layout of how everything went so incredibly wrong despite my perfect logic. I realize now that the world is simply not ready for women who practice radical transparency and emotional bravery. Ethan's deception and Liam's vindictive replacement strategy were coordinated efforts by the universe to test my absolute resilience. I refuse to let this material setback break my spirit or convince me that I made a mistake by choosing my own happiness. My only error was assuming that the men around me possessed a shred of the maturity that I carry effortlessly. Ultimately, I am leaving this chapter with my head held high, even if my current physical reality is completely destitute and chaotic. Liam may have the apartment and a new girlfriend, but he will always be a coward who couldn't look me in the eyes. Ethan may have his other ex, but he will remain trapped in a cycle of low-vibrational cheating forever. I am the only one who truly evolved, even if that evolution means sleeping on a friend's couch with a plastic bag of socks. The universe will eventually deliver the palace I truly deserve, leaving these small-minded people far behind in my wake.